Hi, everyone. I have with me right now Fluffy, and I wanted to, before he says goodbye, that he's now got a summer cut. He's a little lion, and he's a scrumbly little lion, but oh, I love these kitties. And one of these days we'll get both Fluffy and Chocolate back here together, but at least you got to say hello to Fluffy. Everybody wants to know how they're doing, so they got a summer cut, and so they're going to look like little lions for a while without all of the big hair. And I wanted tonight to give a shout out to Earthfiles viewers in New York and Vermont. Maybe some of you are with me tonight in the Earthfiles YouTube channel that we're doing right now. And I wanted you to know, those on the East Coast, that I haven't spoken in New York City for a while. The last time was Alan Steinfeld's Fions. But he has asked me if I could give an evening presentation in Manhattan at a place called the Assemblage on May 10th, a month from now. And this would be in collaboration or with his New Realities efforts. Alan has asked me to share from some of my latest keynote work that I'm doing for conferences. And this one is Whistleblower Revelations about AI and an alien presence. That's also what I'm going to be talking about this coming Friday night at the Ozark UFO Conference in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Look forward to seeing a lot of you there. We're going on Phenomena Radio to do a live program with Rich Dolan. And I will be there with Rich and Race Hobbs. And John will be in Illinois by Skype. And we're going to follow up on some of the behind the scenes since December. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the third video, and what may be coming. Now, working with Alan Steinfeld, and the whole goal for his work, my work, is to try to help expand people's, I guess consciousness is a word that a lot of people feel is overworked. So maybe if we said raising our awareness, raising our knowledge about facts, that we're on a planet where there is and are alien presences. And in this effort, in addition to what Alan would like to do in New York City, there is a woman, Mia Faraletto, who is organizing a small, intimate gathering in Berkshire, Vermont, that would take place in the next 3 to 4 days after I do the presentation in New York City. And there will be 5 other people. There will be 6 of us doing presentations with a small, more intimate group audience. And this particular Vermont group that will be taking place on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th of May would be at a Berkshire writing school. It's supposed to be very beautiful. All the food is organic. In a kind of like, if you imagine, if you have ever fantasized about a Vermont ranch or a farm to go visit for a while, that's what the weekend in May would be like. It sure does sound like a lot of fun to me, and I would like to encourage all of you who might be able to get to New York City on May 10th for an evening presentation at the Assemblage to email Alan at newrealitiesmedia1@gmail.com. That's for Alan Steinfeld. His email is newrealitiesmedia1@gmail.com. And then for that would be for information about tickets, times, dates, everything more specific. And we'll also be putting that up at Earthfiles social media to reinforce. And for the intimate Vermont gathering, May 11th to 14th, where I would be speaking along with half a dozen other people: David Lewis, Marilyn Gawacki, PhD, Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, PhD, Jennifer Stein from Philadelphia, and Alan Steinfeld from New York City. Please contact for ticket information Mia Ferroletto. Her phone number is 802-952-6217, and her email is mia.ferroleto@gmail.com. Now, in this age of so much turmoil, so much revolutionary fever in so many directions, and so many geopolitical conflicts, and there is this growing, you can almost hear it, like a theme, a sub-theme that's coming in every day into our lives, into news, into science breakthroughs, and it has to do with artificial intelligence. That's why one of my main presentations this year of 2018 has to do with what whistleblowers are saying about artificial intelligence and an alien presence. Right now, for tonight, I had posted at Earthfiles at the very top. If you go to earthfiles.com, you will see this new report, Artificial Androids Not from Earth. And in this revolutionary time, about robots, androids, cyborgs, potential existential threats to human existence if we replace ourselves with smart, strong, never dying, never getting sick, artificial intelligence. We might be copying what the so-called gray extraterrestrial biological entities from the Roswell crashes and beyond are doing now to spread themselves and to populate the Milky Way galaxy with genetics, genetically manipulated hybrids, clones, androids, robots, place them planet to planet, solar system to solar system. You expand territory, you gain control, but the prime intelligence doesn't have to go where all of the androids and the clones and the cyborgs and the robots are sent. Now, it's 12 years ago. The date was April 24th, 2006. And I received an email from a Central Ohio businessman named Ronald Sequoy. He was 59 years old at the time, a bachelor's degree in clinical psychology from Ohio University. And he knew that where he had lived was not really very far from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was a family man with 3 children, and he considered himself to be a devout Christian. And in his first email to me, he said, quote, "I used to work for a man in Dayton, Ohio, a retired U.S. Air Force flight surgeon who, in a moment of great stress and emotional breakdown, crying, told me he was one of 5 military doctors called in to look at 2 alien bodies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base." By June, I emailed him back, Mr. Sequoy, and I asked for more information, and he sent me back an email. Well, this man, this flight surgeon from Wright, he lived in Dayton, always that I knew. He was the flight surgeon for an entire SAC, Strategic Air Command wing. He did not tell me precisely when this occurred, but I had the impression it was in the late 1940s, around the time of the Roswell crashes. He said how he got phoned while he was asleep He had to rush out to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. 3 generals were there. What he had to sign, threats were made to him. 5 doctors were involved. Only 2 doctors actually touched the alien bodies. 1 alien was dead and showed no injuries. 1 was burned and had a horrible hole in one leg with this anguished look locked upon its face in death, is what he wrote, close quote. At that time, in 1947, the Wright Field from pre-1947 had become Wright-Patterson Air Force when we split the Army and the Air Force in 1947. That was done under Truman. And he goes on to explain that this flight surgeon who has been downloading all of this agony that he had kept inside of him was a Catholic. And that the flight surgeon told Ronald Secoy that he felt, talking to this man, that it had destroyed his religion, and that he had become terrified of our U.S. government, talking about the flight surgeon who was involved with the autopsy of these 2 non-humans. And as he talked with Ronald Secoy, Ronald said, he made me swear never to tell anyone, and so for years I never really did tell people this story. To the best of my knowledge, now I think the public deserves to know. And so do I. The surgeon and I talked about this for some time, as he was trying to explain to me that he wanted me to know he had lived up to what he had signed, non-disclosure agreements. He had been threatened. He was scared to death. But then he began to sob. He broke down and he said, if I told you something, would you absolutely give me your word that you would never tell a living soul on earth? And I asked him then, well, does this have to do with your job as a flight surgeon? Very much so, he said. And now we get the story. He got a call from Wright-Patterson. That wasn't an unusual event to get a call. But what was unusual was that it was in the middle of the night and he was ordered to get to the base immediately. He told the people on the phone that it would take him 2 hours, and the person on the phone at the other end interrupted. He said a general came on the phone line, a general he did not know. He, the flight surgeon, was given a direct order by the general to be at the base, Wright-Patterson, in 45 minutes. So he had to scramble, and he realized he couldn't go in his pajamas. So he put on his uniform and jumped in his car, and when he got there, other anomalous things happened. Normally, he said he would just go through the gate and just drive onto the base through the checkpoint because of who he was, one of half a dozen flight surgeons. He had a sticker on his car, and people at the guard post would know who he was, but there was a vehicle waiting for him, and he was told to follow it, and he was escorted onto the base. He said, are we on alert? Has there been a plane crash? He wondered what was going on because he had never seen anything like this before. Nothing had happened to him like this before. And Ronald asked him what year this was, and he said he wasn't sure exactly, but it was the late 1940s. And he thinks it was tied to exactly the time of the Roswell crashes, which were in 1947. He is escorted through a series of buildings that he had never been in. And when he got to this one, he was ushered inside by military police with an escort. And he began to feel fearful because this was back in the era of right after World War II, and we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. He thought maybe something was wrong. There was some kind of a war alert. And then when he went inside the building, he was met by a general He had never met this general before, who said, "He did not give me any names, but he was taken into," meaning nobody is telling him anything. Not even the general is telling him his name. But the flight surgeon is taken into a side room, and when he went in there, the general closed the door and said, "Sit down." The flight surgeon sat down at a table, and the general sat down across from him. And instead of an explanation, the general slid a piece of paper across the table at the flight surgeon and said, "Read that." And the flight surgeon looked at it and saw a kind of form he had never seen before either. It had to do with security, and it was about a level of security clearance he had never heard anyone talk about before. He turned it over and he said, "What do you want me to do with this?" And the general said, "I want you to sign it." So he signed it, confused, because he was not into top secret aircraft or back engineering or anything like that. He was a flight surgeon. "So why do I have to sign this?" And the general said, quote, "Because you're just about to enter into another level of military experience that you are not familiar with, and at a certain level of keeping secrets that requires this level. I have to warn you about something." And what followed from the general were threats. In all of his career in the military, the flight surgeon had always been treated with the most respect, and the fact that he was a colonel, this type of conduct by a general, really, it put him off, it angered him. And suddenly, here is the colonel having to sign a special high-level top-secret form, and then the general tells him, "What you see here, what you hear, you cannot ever take off this base. You can't ever talk about it to anybody unless you are addressed by your superiors. And what you are about to go through, you have to only talk about with your superiors and with no other members of the military, nobody below you, nobody in the medical end of all the people you deal with on a daily basis." Close quote. And they said, and if it was ever found out that the flight surgeon had discussed what was about to happen with anybody, he could end up destroying his military career, and he could end up being court-martialed. A general to a colonel flight surgeon, that kind of threat, that kind of bullying over what is to come next. No one warned the flight surgeon about what he was about to see. He was just told, "Go in and stay along the wall with your back to the wall." And there were other doctors in the room. He was also told, "From your scientific expertise being a medical doctor and your science background, observe. Anything that comes to your mind, take notes. Anything. No matter what it is that hits your brain, write it down." And the flight surgeon, confused, scared, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And one general, now there's more than one, says, "It will be self-explanatory." And when he walked into the room, he saw there was an autopsy going on. There were two medical doctors dressed up in garb, and that they had a body on a table, and there were lights on this and camera equipment, both motion picture and a man taking still photography. There were two other men along the wall. He later found out that all five of them were doctors in that one room. They were all military doctors. There were two tables side by side, and on two tables were two dead, alien, non-human beings. He said, He felt his whole world shattered, and he could feel tears in his eyes. And as his hands were shaking, as he was telling Ronald C. Coy, he said, "I don't know why this happened to me." And then he moved on to the description of the alien beings under autopsy in that surgery room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, probably in the summer of 1947. The colonel flight surgeon said that one of these alien beings looked perfectly normal in the sense that there was no injury. There was nothing that could be seen on the body that would be an injury. But the being was obviously dead. It was the alien being on the table next to it. Just was horribly burned, had a horrific wound in one of its legs, and he said the look on its face he could never forget. It was the look of anguished horror at the moment of its death. It was frozen on the being's face. The autopsy was already going on. He could not say anything to anybody. He was frozen in silence. He said the stench was unbelievable, and he was overcome by the situation and wanted to vomit. But he knew he couldn't. He wanted to run out of the room, but he knew he couldn't do that either. For the first several minutes that he was in the room, he was just transfixed, staring at what was going on and was not writing anything. And then he remembered the directive from that general. Write anything that comes to your head. Write it down. So he said, with almost not looking at the paper, just staring at what was going on, anything that came to his head he wrote. And he said that these were obviously once living creatures, but unlike any living creature he had ever seen before. He said it was like they were not real, like they were dolls. Ronald C. Coy says to the flight surgeon, "I don't understand what you mean." The flight surgeon said, "Well, they just did not have the appearance of being weathered." "I still don't know what you mean." "Well, look at your skin. Think about living creatures on this planet. They aren't pristine. They don't look like a doll sitting on a shelf. These creatures did not have any signs of age. They did not have any look of wear about them." Ronald says, "You mean wrinkles?" He said, "Exactly. They did not look like they were wrinkled. They looked like 4-foot-tall dolls. They didn't have big shoulders. They had slender arms. They didn't look powerful. Very slim fingers. Turns out there were 6 fingers, just like the Santilli film. If these are aliens from outer space, they are not like some kind of bizarre creatures you would be afraid of if you saw them, because they could overwhelm you physically, like monsters in a movie. That's not what these were. These were just little creatures that reminded him of dolls." And he said, "The first thing I noticed about it right away was when they were looking at one of the eyes." He said, "I got the distinct impression that this eye they were examining, it was not anything like a human eye. And it did not even look like any living creature's eye. It was more like an optical instrument. It had layers, and it looked like some sort of optical device, not like a real eye." He told me that it was not like it was living tissue either, like you would see in a human eye or like in an animal. Eyes are eyes. He said this was really more like an optical device, like a camera or some kind of machine. It did not look living. It looked mechanical. And then in the day after Roswell, Philip J. Corso, on pages 45 to 46, here's what Colonel Corso, separate from the flight surgeon, separate from what's happening at Wright-Patterson. But this is such a resonating piece from Colonel Corso's book. Colonel Corso, "I was most interested in the file descriptions accompanying a 2-piece set of dark, elliptical eyepieces as thin as skin. The Colonel and General Trudeau were able to handle all of this extraterrestrial technology that was transferred to General Trudeau's office in the Pentagon. Corso told me how he went up to General Trudeau's office. There were 2 or 3 large file cabinets, and the general was keeping in the various drawers extraterrestrial technology that was retrieved to be back engineered by having Colonel Corso go out to private corporations and companies and like Lockheed and take this extraterrestrial technology to one person and one person only. And only one person would ever know where the source came from, and they were never to speak ever. And that was how they were controlling, that they were seeding corporation, company after company, as Colonel Corso said. The whole goal was to get all the extraterrestrial technology into the hands of our brightest and our best in private corporations and businesses in the United States, with the goal to back engineer and then patent. And the patents inside of the United States would help protect and keep the technology out of the hands of perceived enemies. So, as he writes, he held this dark elliptical, these eyepieces as thin as skin. He said the Walter Reed pathologist said they adhered to the lenses of the extraterrestrial creature's eyes and seemed to reflect existing light, even in what looked like complete darkness, so as to illuminate and intensify images in the darkness to allow the wearer to pick out shapes in complete and total absence of light. The report had said that the pathologist at Walter Reed Hospital, who autopsied one of these creatures, tried to peer through them, the lenses that they took off the extraterrestrial eyes. The doctor tried to peer through what they took off and tried to do it in darkness, and to watch the 1 or 2 army sentries and medical orderlies that were walking down a corridor adjacent to the pathology lab. And he said these figures were illuminated through these lenses in a greenish-orange color, depending upon how they moved. But the pathologist could see only the outer shape of the moving soldiers. And when they got close to each other, their shapes blended into a single form. But they could also see the outlines of furniture and the wall and objects on desks, like perhaps some sort of a variation on what we would call starlight scopes today, or infrared, or a combination thereof. Now, back to the flight surgeon standing with his back against that wall in that room where the autopsy is going on those 2 beings. The flight surgeon said the second thing that he noticed and wrote down was, these creatures do not have sex organs, and that led him medically to think there was no way for them to relieve themselves. There were no exterior orifices. If these things are living creatures, all living creatures eat. All living creatures expel waste. I don't see how they would do that. And that was the second thing he wrote down on his paper. How do these beings eat? How do they expel waste? And what he is describing are something like cloned androids. So then he started trying to zone in on his concentrating on what was happening, and the next thing that he started looking at was a mouth, and he said the mouth does not look like a carnivore. It doesn't look like it could eat like an ape or a monkey or a human. It was obviously an upright creature, bipedal, 2 legs, feet. It must have walked upright like a hominid, but it was nothing like a human being. It looked, and this is the interesting thing here, it looked almost like an insect in the shape of its head. The insect part of it might be why the eyes were so strange. It was totally different than a human eye. It did not look like it ate solid food. It might have lived on only fluids. But knowing how a human expels liquid from its body, how did this creature do even that? He could not see any signs of that. And there's probably a lot of you in the audience tonight who have heard about the stories from the 40s and the 50s of people, whistleblowers, saying that we were dealing with creatures from someplace else in the universe and that they excreted through their skin. Maybe these particular ones are in that category. He said the doctors opened up the thoracic section of the body, chest, and it had organs and internal components, but nothing like human beings. Not nearly as complex. That really got his attention right away. He says, you open up a human being and it's just packed with all sorts of things, including the GI tract and the lungs. The internal organs were like a living beings, but they not what we would have thought in the terms of remembering his medical training about the human body. He said he was just a flight surgeon, but he understood the human body completely. And these creatures were not even as complex as humans. There were things missing inside of them, and it baffled him. And there were obviously, he's dealing with a living organism, but how does it function? And he noticed the hands. The hands were, for the size of the body, very large, but delicate with long fingers. And these are the hands that had 6 fingers in the photographs from Santelli. He also saw that the fingertips had pads, like at the tips. He said, I was just overwhelmed. These are extraterrestrials. These are people from another world. Now I'm starting to get overwhelmed by this whole thing. Normally, if someone would tell you about a story like this, you would think they were crazy. But I know he was not crazy. He experienced this. He was not making up a story that was disturbing him so badly. This had happened to him at Wright-Patterson. Now, I wanted to share this tonight for at least a couple of main reasons. So much of my work right now is trying to get deeper and deeper and deeper into this whole issue of what exactly are the entities that we have been reading about in what we'll call this slice of time from 47 to 2018 after World War II. And we know that from the cuneiform and the Sumerians and that there were other intelligences on this planet back then and going back, as that DIA guy told me in December that I've talked to you about, all the way back 270 million years. So what are these entities that started showing up in these craft that either we shot down or they were, as some people have said, maybe they were like Trojan horses, they were planted so that humans would start getting specific technology and see what we would do with it and back engineer. That the whole thing is like both a game, like we're in a big Xbox, or is like a big chess game, and we're beginning to catch on a little bit more now as we move into 2018, looking back through 70 years. And that if we are right now in 2018 going forward for, as Elon Musk says, and he says it with great concern, he thinks we only have 4 years. Said this on television. Only 4 years, 18 to 22, to get a hold on what is happening around the world with the development of militarized, weaponized soldiers, to security guards, to robotic nannies, to the truck drivers. We're going to have 20 to 30% of all driven trucks transporting goods by 11 years from now are going to be robotic. It's coming that fast. and that there are countries like Japan and China and Russia who want militarized autonomous robots. Militarized autonomous robots means only the robots will choose who they kill and who they don't, based on algorithms. We are entering a dangerous, dangerous time, an exciting time, a feeling of great revolutionary potential that could go to wonderful and exciting directions in space and on the earth and beyond. But the reason I'm sharing this tonight is there is this underbelly of everything now related to the unleashing of artificial intelligence in every walk of our lives as you project out for the next 10 to 20 years what companies already have planned and what nations already have. The North and South border, the North Korean border and the South Korean border of Korea, they have robots, heavy-duty armament, and they're all autonomous. The robots at that border right now, they are the only ones that choose whether they're going to shoot to kill or not. So the more we look for information about the consequences of depending upon robots, androids, clones, cyborgs, perhaps the more we will begin to see through a new lens of the directions we are going and what might be an existential threat to humanity in the future. And that just like you take a sphere and you turn it, on the other side is exactly what is coming through the story of this flight surgeon at Wright-Patterson. That these beings were not human, and they were not in any fashion as he would have expected an independent life form to be. And we know today that we have been dealing with non-humans from someplace else that have manipulated DNA and already evolving primates to create a whole series of Homo sapiens, and we're one of them. So where is the line begin and end of what is an android, what is a clone, what is a robot, what is a cyborg, what is a human, and what were those beings on those tables at Wright-Patterson? And where are they today from wherever they came? And what are all of these different species that have been coming and going, and so many people in the abduction syndrome who have had personal interaction and say, I'm not dealing with what we think of a life form. They think they're clones because they all look alike, where they're hybrids because they look part ET and part human, or they are robotic, which is supposed to be all machinery and technology, or they're cyborgs, which is you take some kind of an organic body and then you add to it from technology and machinery to make it stronger, faster, be able to do things that organic creatures cannot do. All of this, when you bring it together, the flight surgeon 47, the future rushing at us and collapsing in what Elon Musk says is 4 years to get a handle of some kind of control, some kind of international law on what's happening with artificial intelligence. Or, Elon Musk says, it is an existential threat. existential threat is the annihilation of humanity by its own doing, by setting in motion very sophisticated machines that don't need to sleep, don't get sick, don't get tired, just get faster and better at everything. What an irony. We haven't even been officially told on this planet yet that we're not alone in this universe. And we're cloning those macaques, first primate clones. We're hybridizing. We're creating artificial intelligence to be soldiers, policemen, truck drivers, nannies. Maybe with audiences like you and a few of us who would really, really like to know what the whole truth is and let the chips fall where they may. If we just knew it all, if we just knew the whole big, huge, bloody truth, maybe it would change the direction that we're all going on planet Earth for the rest of this century and beyond. I pray every day. I pray every day that Homo sapiens sapien will survive in a positive, non-totalitarian way. Who were those bodies that the surgeon described? What is their relationship to the prime intelligence that made them? What are all of their relationships to us? So, wish me luck. I'm going to Eureka Springs tomorrow. I'm going to be doing an artificial intelligence presentation on Friday. I think I'm scheduled from 3:30 to 5, right before dinner on Friday. And for those of you going, then you hopefully, just from this little bit tonight, you know how I think this is really one of the most important subjects going now. And I'd welcome your feedback. I would love to hear from all of you, and especially from those of you who are working in military or science or medicine, what you may or may not have been exposed to in relationship to autopsies on non-human beings. And you can always communicate to me confidentially. I never, ever release the names or locations of anybody who requests anonymity. But we're in such a strange situation on this planet where a reporter like myself, I would like to report names and dates and all of the background. But because we are living within governments that have made knowing that we're not alone in the universe a reason to penalize people if they learn anything about the truth. That upside down, backwards aspect is what I am trying to resist with facts and truth. So join me tonight, and if we have time, I think I could take a couple of questions, and I will go back when I'm back next week to the questions that you have sent and I'm kept. So I will start taking from those again, but tonight maybe we could take a couple more questions.
Awesome. Hey, Linda. So first, I'd like to thank a couple of folks with their generous super chats. Douglas Smith, Respirigu, Matt, RJ, Angie, Metalhead, and Nancy Volker. Thank you so much for your support.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Every bit helps on this complex journey.
Here's our first question. How far do you think the secret space program has truly developed? Interplanetary alliances and sphere beings versus documented black projects and ARVs?
very good question, and I will answer through the voice of Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewer in Project Stargate at the Defense Intelligence Agency in the end of the 1980s. And Lynn was with John Burroughs and me on Phenomena Radio a year and a half ago, and we had a copy of a remote viewing he had done on Rendlesham, and in the process of that interview, he said that one of his tasks that he learned about later was involved with going out into the universe and exploring. And he says that the universe is teeming with life. And he said there are friendlies, there are unfriendlies. And the friendly, unfriendly, he said, took him to a conversation that he had with a man who used to be one of the bosses at the Defense Intelligence Agency at the end of the 80s when they were doing the remote viewing for the CIA, NSA, and DIA. And he said one of those men from back then he met and talked with just in the last couple of years. And he said, my old boss is now one of the heads of the Interstellar Trade Group office in the Pentagon. He said, Linda, we're trading. We're trading out with all sorts. He said when the gray Ebens, especially, we would get things from crashes, and they started salting and planting things because they were so intrigued by what humans were doing with trying to back engineer their technology. He said that's how it started. The Ebens communicated that they liked X, whatever it was that we made into something. And so they took it and then they asked for more. And he said, and now we've got an interstellar trade route. And I believe him. Lynn, I believe. And it ties into Gary McKinnon. What was that, 2001-ish, when Gary McKinnon was trying to hack into, and said so, NASA or CIA. He was trying from his simple modem in London, and ended up getting into a computer and seeing a spreadsheet, and on the spreadsheet it had a column that said non-terrestrial, and it was not pilots, but it was non-terrestrial, I think it was non-terrestrial officers. And he also saw the word solar warden. And we know that that is a USA Intel project having to do with various kinds of observations and interactions around the sun and what comes and goes. And that was a long time ago. And so the issue of our being so much more advanced at some level in the United States government than anything that you've read about in the New York Times or heard about on TV news, as far as I know, is substantial. Another question. Are you there?
Yes, I'm ready for the next one.
Yeah, okay.
First,
maybe.
I'd like to thank our super chats from Vicky, Wayne Burrell, and Christy. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very, very, very much.
Okay, and I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, Linda, so you might have to help me out.
Okay.
Opinion on the Atacama humanoid and the To the Stars Academy widely publicized paper stating that it was only a fetus.
Atacama, in South America. This is the 6-inch little, to call it a little fetus. It has been in a controversy for several years. And when the Nolan lab at Stanford, Gary Nolan is the head, released the report that they had not found any genes except Homo sapien genes, but that there were a couple of dozen places in the genome. Here, let me do it this way. When you look at a sentence, say in a magazine or newspaper, and it starts, and you've got the first letter, let's say, A mailman went to the post office. That is a sentence made up of words, made up of letters, made up of spaces, curly cues, and all of this. So the genome of Homo sapiens sapien, which is our model, is 1 billion letters. And those billion letters are put into words. Now, so when he says that they find it is Homo sapiens sapien genome with a couple of dozen, whether it's damaged genes, totally altered genes, whatever they are, we don't really have the details, that they aren't given. But enough to have made what was an evolving fetus into this 6 or 8 inch strange thing with a high oval head and so forth. The problem is now a general one on the planet. When you get into microbiology, when you get into the investigation of genetics, which is increasingly important, there may be 1/4% of the world population who has any education, who can even talk with each other. So that means all the rest of us who do not have an MD or a PhD in microbiology or anything, then we are at the mercy of what gets reported. And in this case, it is so bizarre that I can understand why general audiences say, how could this possibly be all human genes? Well, the next step is there will hopefully be more discussions, more papers, I hope, about what exactly was the work at the genetic level that produced this report that is in and of itself become controversial about whether or not this strange thing that has been argued about for several years is totally human or not. Now, on the other side of this is also the mummies from Peru and the big white Maria. And it is my understanding so far, and we'll be doing other reports, that we'll be hearing from people genetically, that when analysis was done on Maria, that I believe that the consensus in 3 or 4 different labs is human as well, but with abnormalities in the genes. And so now we've got 2 with the same kind of confusion for the general public. And I think it means that there's going to have to be some kind of an evolution in all of our learning about genomes, genes, and when we get reports, who do we trust and what do we trust? So that's on those. Now, to the stars, we had on Phenomena Radio last week, it was 2 extraordinarily good hours with Grant Cameron. And he said something that I think is very important to consider, that no matter what the end goal originally was from Tom DeLonge and To the Stars, whatever has occurred, we are now at a point where if they will keep on releasing gun camera footage, let's say every month or every other month, and that they will have pilots, they will have firsthand military people and others that really can speak from authority of experience and knowledge, I think it would go a long way to solidifying what I think Chris Mullen and Jim Semivan and Hal Puthoff and Louis Elizondo and that group working with To the Stars, what they would like. And that is We're confirming there are UFOs. And we're not going any further. It's like, okay, we're going to keep showing you what we're dealing with, but they're not prepared to start unrolling all of the big complicated subjects. I'd like to see the big complicated subjects start being unrolled right now. But at least we're in a dialogue where if they keep putting out these videos that pilots I've talked to are impressed with, then it's a step. No matter how much silence there seems to be in and around even their efforts, at least if they keep getting these, let's say they graduate from gun camera footage to something else taken from other cameras, as long as there's chain of custody about who did the videotaping, where, latitude, longitude, date, time. We need a lot more of that, I think. But I'll ask you all, let's end on this note. I would really like to know from all of you, how many feel like the December 16th front page above the fold in the New York Times was really, truly a crack that made a dent in the policies of denial and lies since World War II? I'd really like to hear back. I think the crack is there for good, and what we all need to keep doing is trying to widen that crack, and hopefully this year of 2018, let's just get the headline that changes the whole paradigm of this earth to we are not alone in this universe. Let's get past the nonsense. Let's move on to the actual realistic ground that we need to be on if we're ever going to meet whatever made us. Because I think we deserve an exciting future. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, wish me luck in Eureka Springs, and I'll be back next Wednesday with whatever else has come across this intersection that I call Earthfiles.
And before you sign off, Linda, can we thank 3 more folks?
Yes.
Hey There Boy, Seabrook, Munko, and Alex. Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for everything. I just can't tell you how much it means to have so many of you coming and so many of you realizing this isn't really a very easy path that I'm on. And so I appreciate all your help. Thank you.